Imagine a place where healing begins. Welcome to Hidden Oaks, our serene 46-acre off-the-grid ranch, dedicated to guiding you on your path to recovery from addiction and past traumas. Here, surrounded by the tranquility of nature, we offer a safe space for renewal and growth. At Hidden Oaks, we understand that the journey to recovery can be challenging. That's why our compassionate team is here to support you every step of the way, providing personalized treatment programs tailored to your unique needs. Take the first step towards reclaiming your life today. Call us at 972-932-2033 or visit our website at resolutionshealthcare.com to learn more. Remember, the path to recovery runs through Hidden Oaks. Let us help you find your way. Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight is a special week. Not only last week did we win an award for the show, part of the radio network we're a part of, we won the New Show of the Year, Guppy Award. Yeah. But on top of that, being able to celebrate that and a week later bring on my little sister, Rachel Daugherty, who is a licensed specialist in school psychology. Yes. And we're going to talk about some kids today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. How's the conference you were at today?
It's really great. So every year, and I was really happy that it was in Dallas again this year, of course, like to come and see you and to be around. But I always tell my friends, like, if you know me, like, I love our TASC conference. TASC is Texas Association of School Psychologists. And we have a conference every single year, but I love coming to TASC conference. It feels like the beginning of like Christmas season for me. And I love getting to come. I get to see my friends and my cohort, and getting to just to connect with people around the state is always one of my favorite things. So it's been really awesome the last couple of days. Yeah. I love conference every year.
Yeah, it's nice to get out and network, and it's also nice of knowing that when it comes around, since last year, obviously, when I moved here, but knowing you're going to be in town and getting to coordinate something like this too, where you can come and share some dirt on your older brother and scare away all of our viewers.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
What do you want to hear?
Yeah. Well, what I would like to hear and start with, and I thought it was a great call out that you were making just on the heels of coming from the conference, but kind of talking a little bit about school psychology appreciation week or month or
week. So school psychology appreciation is all next week.
They only give you a week, huh?
Yeah, only give us a week, 1 week a year.
So as a school psychologist, what would you want to just kind of share with people who have kids in schools that are utilizing these support networks about something like an appreciation week and why it's important to, just make sure that we're taking care of our clinicians and looking out for them?
So I always think that school psychologists are very behind the scenes people. We work a lot with teachers. We work a lot with administrators, the whole team that is working for a student to be successful in school. So we're trained in academic interventions, behavioral interventions, counseling, just a whole slew of things that we're trained to be able to help a student who has various issues in the school be successful. And a lot of the times it's not at the forefront. A lot of the times we're not seen. We're the ones sitting in the back of the classroom doing behavioral observations. We're the ones like in the meeting. A lot of the times we may be the most honest ones, and sometimes we say some things that people don't necessarily want to hear, like our coworkers, fellow educators. So a lot of the times it's a field and we're people who aren't as appreciated or as seen. So that's always something that I like to tell others is like, hey, find your school psych on campus. Give them a little hug on the neck, because they're working really hard for teachers, families, educators, students, just everyone as a whole.
Yeah. Well, and I know you and I have talked a lot over the years, just at the times we've consulted as brother and sister, but also clinician to clinician, kind of about what it feels like working in the schools and rolling with the punches. Right. And it's one thing I remember when I used to work in the schools back in the day, I always took with me is like, it's a team of people rolling with punches in these settings, trying their darndest to help these families who are really in a hard spot.
Right.
And you know a lot about that because you're working in rural areas. They got you driving around a lot up there in the Panhandle.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, because you're going out into like some of the school districts where you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yes. So I have experience working in like urban inner city, and then now I work in a district where it's a co-op that serves 4 different rural districts. So I drive around to a couple different districts, and one of the biggest differences between working in a city and then going out more rural is resources. So a lot of these families that are rural and these schools that are rural, they just don't have access the way that we could, like when we're in a city and we can call up a mental health facility, or we have Star Care up in the Lubbock area and, call them up and it's a little bit more easily accessible. Or in a bigger district, we have social workers that are working for the district. In a rural area, a lot of the times the school psychologist is the one that is providing those services. They're the ones that are reaching out to all of those resources. They're acting as the social worker. They're acting as the counselor. They're acting as a behavior specialist. So we wear a lot of different hats. So I have a lot of different experiences with that. A lot of the times I'm called in crisis. If a student is having a crisis, I'm the one that they're calling, and they're like, "What do we do? What assessments do we need to do? How do we need to take care of this?" So that's definitely a huge thing and a huge part of what my experiences are, switching from that being in the city and going to rural and providing those services. So just a lot of different hats that we wear whenever we're outside of a bigger city.
Yeah. And I want to maybe get into some of the different hats that a school psychologist wears. But as you were telling me that, it reminded me of when you were telling me about that young student where, like, if you get locked up, bro, I have to come visit you where they're going to lock you up. And it's like, this is what the clinicians out there working in these settings are doing. They are going to these locations, and making sure that these students are followed. And it's very unsung, I think, a lot of times in our society, that there are professionals who are willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Social workers come to mind a lot of times in that kind of setting as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you were talking about assessments.
Yes.
What are some of the like main ones that you're using as a licensed specialist in school psychology? What are some of the go-tos that you might suggest for a parent to have their child do?
So I'm going to keep it kind of general, just because we have a wide range of disabilities that we're assessing for. So we work under IDEA, and that's the Individual with Disabilities Education Act of 2004. And there's 13 disability criteria or eligibilities that we're looking at to receive special education services. A school psychologist is trained to assess for all of those. So
do they have to meet all 13 or just
no,
a certain? Yeah,
there's specific ones that they can meet criteria for. So there's ones that are like if kids have multiple disabilities or physical disabilities, like they're in a wheelchair, they have diabetes, they have a seizure disorder. So those are ones that they're covered under a specific criteria. And then we have the ones where if we're looking at a specific learning disability and things like written expression or comprehension, a math-specific learning disability. Dyslexia is a huge one in our state right now. There's been a lot of laws that have been put into place that have changed a lot in assessment over the last couple of years for dyslexia. And then the ones that I have done and have the most experience with is assessing for educational eligibility for autism. And then it's previously emotional disturbance, and another change was made in the last year, and it's an emotional disability. So those are kind of primarily what we do. And if you're talking to different practitioners in the state, like just all over the state, some school psychologists will do the full wide assessment, do the cognitive and achievement assessments for specific learning disabilities, as well as their autism and emotional disability assessments. Where I am in West Texas, I was primarily just doing autism and emotional disability. So yeah, it's just a wide range of assessments that we do for the eligibility criteria.
Do you think with, like, when you were talking about the new laws that are being passed, do you feel boots on the ground, like it's broadening your ability to provide these services and catch more of the diagnosis? Or do you feel like sometimes you're constricted and being constricted on, like, these are the specific regulations I have to follow? I'm always curious about that, just as a clinician myself, of like, where are my hands tied versus like, where am I free to kind of assess this through and make sure this doesn't get missed, the struggle that someone's experiencing?
I'd I'd say it's kind of both sides. Like you can be very constricted sometimes on what you're assessing. Like, for example, when we're assessing for autism, it's educational eligibility. So that looks a lot different. Not a lot different, but there's things that we're looking for that are a little bit less than what's in the DSM.
Sure.
So the DSM, you're looking at these 13 different areas, and that's how you're doing a diagnosis of autism. For autism in the school setting, there has to be an educational need. So a lot of the times we do kind of meet those roadblocks, because if a student does have autism, there's a lot of confusion on should they be receiving special education services or not. Because if they're not showing maybe some more of like behavioral social deficits, they're able to function in the school setting without a whole lot of support. Then we're questioning, should we put special education services in place, or should we look at less intense services, not put the label on there, things like that. So sometimes we meet those roadblocks, and sometimes we do feel a little constricted just based on the situation, because situational circumstances. There's some parents that'll push that, there's some parents that won't. It just kind of depends.
Yeah, and you were kind of touching on another roadblock that meets that one as well, when burnout comes in. And Rachel and I were talking a little bit about the burnout, that can happen for clinicians, but teachers too. And I can only imagine being a teacher in that setting where like we know something's going on here, but we can't get the services more for this child. Right. And then that teacher is having to deal with it, and then they're getting burnt out, and now they're storming out of the class or calling the clinician names. I won't say any of the names I've been called back when I worked at the school, because we get canceled, but I'm sure you deal with this kind of stuff every day in and day out.
And especially when we're in a time where behavior is becoming just more and more prevalent in the school. There are more kids that are coming to us that are having behavioral issues from a young age, from the time that they're 3 or 4 years old. And it's not just behavioral deficits too. A lot of the times they have language deficits. They have a lot of impulsivity. And there's just all of these behaviors that we're seeing in the school. And with the state of education right now, just in general, we don't have a lot of teachers coming in right now, and then our good teachers are getting burnt out because they're having to deal with student behavior more often, way more often than they had to before. So when we have a whole team working together and we're trying to figure out what to do for the kid, and my primary role most of the time is advocating for the student. I want to advocate for everybody, and I want to make sure that the family is getting what they need and the teacher is getting what they need. But most importantly, in the school setting for me, is that we are providing what we need for the student who is needing help, because they're exhibiting these behaviors for a reason. Behavior is communication. And so we need to find what those problems are, and we meet those roadblocks sometimes, especially when we have all of these factors with teachers, and they're dealing with their own burnout. They're dealing with maybe their own mental health issues and things like that. And when we're trying to implement and we're trying to do what's best for a student, then we often run into the conflicts. We run into more teachers, maybe walking out, or maybe not wanting to come back next year because of how frustrating it can get dealing with student behavior, and maybe not wanting the student in their classroom because it's a lot to deal with when you're dealing with your own things too.
That's one of the biggest ones. I like what you said there too. Behavior is communication, right? And I think a lot of us listening to this could probably think of it as well, of like, we communicate a lot when we take action, right? And so when we pull that in, I'm curious if we could maybe put a little bit more like just some thoughts or words maybe around like when we say behavior, communication is behavior, behavior is communication. What are we talking about there? And so I think that's an important point when we're talking about intervening with kids and helping their families.
I think what we see a lot more nowadays, like in relationship with behavior being communication, and you guys have talked a lot about on this podcast too, trauma. I work with kids who have severe trauma. Like, they go through things that a 7-year-old should not be going through.
Some of the things you've told me, I'm like, dang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a lot of these kids they're going through it. And a lot of the times when they're engaging in a behavior, when they're flipping a desk and they're escalated to the point where it's really hard to bring them down, that's communicating to you, like maybe their parents didn't come home until 3 o'clock in the morning because there was something going on that shouldn't have been going on. Maybe they're witnessing physical abuse between their parents or whoever in the house. Maybe they're victims of it themselves. You never know what a student is going through. And it's not personal. That's another thing that I always am trying to communicate with the teachers that I work with or the administrators that I work with, whoever I'm working with in the school, and to families too. But it's not personal. Like if they're flipping a desk or if they're calling you a name, like if they're engaging in behavior and they're like, well, F off, and like calling you all of these names, like it's not personal. Like if I always am like, if a 12-year-old is looking at me and calling me a bitch, like I'm not taking it personal because I know that there's something else that is going on. They're trying to communicate something to me. There's something else going on in their life that has made them respond that way in that moment. And we need to get to the root of that and help them. We need to make sure that they're receiving counseling services, that they have somebody to talk to weekly, someone who's coming in and checking in and asking how they're doing.
Right.
We need to make sure that we know too, like we're not engaging in the power struggle. So we're going to walk away and we're not going to let it get to the point where they're throwing the profanities everywhere and calling us names. We can prevent those things.
Yeah, we're the adults here.
Right.
And that's a lot of behavior with kids is like, when you let them step in and start calling the shots, it's like, well, you remember me when I was those ages. You're not going to let little Alan call the shots. It just wasn't a good idea.
We were going to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, straight from the firsthand experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's important too, because there's also this dynamic where when the professionals start taking it personal in the setting, it makes it harder to get to the dynamic in the family where it is personal, right? Where they're going to need a lot of support and resources for them to not take it personal. And you and I know how long that takes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the real work. And I can't tell you how many times, like even in my practice working with adults, we'll process a few minor changes for their kids, and then they'll start getting calls from the schools of like, oh, they're not pushing their classmate anymore. I'm like, yeah, because dad stopped letting himself get kicked at home.
Yeah.
He set a boundary. The child listened to that, and the behavior improved. And I hear that eloquently, the way you were putting that, of just kind of, these are really important to address and recognize that when they're acting out, it's not because they want to break the table, as fun as that may seem, all right? It's because they're trying to tell you something is wrong.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to we were touching a little bit more on like educator wellness when we first started talking. And that's a huge thing, whenever a student is engaging in these behaviors and they're calling you names and then you're taking it so personally as the teacher, the educator, and it's really, really getting to you. I've asked a lot of teachers in the last couple of years, because it's been something I've been very passionate about, to try to help our educators who might be having more difficulties in their personal lives and they're not talking about it and they're kind of holding that in. And there's kind of this culture in education where you're like, yeah, fake it till you make it. And like there's value in that, but you also have to work through your problems. If you're going through something and you're taking it so personally that a student is continuing to call you names, then I think we need to talk about what's going on in your life and what are some things that you need. Like, what are some resources that the teacher needs to, who do you need to talk to? Do you need to talk to me? Like, you can talk to me. Like, that's another thing too that I've learned a lot over the last couple of years. Keeping that communication open with the adults too. It's very easy for me with kids. I love working with kids That's why I'm a school psychologist. Like, I get to work with kids every single day, and it's the best thing ever. I get to sit down with them in counseling. But our teachers hurt too. And they need to be able to know that they also have people that they can talk to as well. Like, I'm not a therapist in the school for adults, but I am a person that you can talk to. I'm a person that you can trust. And that camaraderie in a school is very important too.
It's huge for culture, and I would second that hugely. It's like the teachers who would lean on the clinical staff when I worked. Remember back in the day when I worked at that continuation school?
Yeah.
The teachers that utilized us, they were always in higher spirits. Because we don't, as the clinicians, we don't have to be in the classroom in the front of it all the time. And so we've got a little bit more space in that setting to help the morale, to help the camaraderie. And the ones who didn't, I mean, I've got stories of things, that things I've been called, or watching teachers do things where you would just be baffled. And a lot of it really just does boil down to like taking care of yourself as an adult, and knowing whether you're the teacher in that setting or the clinician that all the chaos is what we signed up for. It's not personal. We are service providers, and we're providing a service to a population in those times that are the most vulnerable. So it's very honorable what teachers are doing and what school psychs are doing, obviously, but we've got to take care of ourselves.
Especially when we know that we just have more rates of behavior. We have higher rates of behavior happening in the school. We have higher rates of adolescent suicide, which is heavy, and just higher rates of more heavy things going on in general that adolescents, children are dealing with. So that means that we're dealing with more of that secondhand trauma, that vicarious trauma, and we might not consciously in the moment know that that's what we're dealing with. But you're walking into your classroom or you're walking into your school building every day, and you're hearing the same old story of Johnny coming, and he might have a new Bruce, or he might say that he didn't get to sleep until 4 a.m. last night for reasons. He didn't get to eat dinner, so breakfast is the only meal that he's had since lunch the previous day. Like, those are the things that we hear a lot every single day. That's what's coming into our classrooms, what's coming into our building. So we have to check ourselves. And, there's a really great quote. I forget who it's by, but I heard it in a couple of different trainings. And every time I'm hearing them, it resonates with me. It's basically like, you can't be walking through water and saying that you're not getting wet. And that's the same thing with trauma. You cannot be experiencing those things that your students are walking in with and say that it's not affecting you. Like, it's very much affecting you. And you have to check in with yourself and check in with other people. Yeah. And find your people that you can talk to. And if you're needing further help, finding that further help.
I think that quote was Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
I just kept kidding. I got kidding. I'm feeling in a little bit more of a jovial mood tonight because I have my little sister here on the show, and it's fun. That lack of accountability, that's always a great place to start when we're not taking the best care of ourselves. And if we can improve that, things do get better. I'm curious, would you want to, or do we want to go in a different direction, like share a little bit on maybe from your perspective as a school psych, why the teen suicide rate is increasing so much?
Yeah, we can absolutely.
Do you have any perspectives on maybe why that's been increasing, just boots on the ground?
I think there are a lot of different things nowadays that teens have access to and that adolescents have access to, and young children have access to, that really affect their mental health. And I think one of the main things is technology and social media. There was a story recently, and it broke my heart because I was like, we have to do better about monitoring our kids and what they are watching and what they have access to. There was a teen that did die by suicide because he had a relationship with an AI generator avatar. I remember hearing about this. And they broke up, or something like that, where it was like they broke it off, and he was not in a good headspace, and he died by suicide. And it really made me think, like, we have to do better in monitoring what our kids have access to. and who they're talking, whether it's AI or somebody else on the internet, we have to, monitor those things, because it does lead to poor mental health. Like, it does show there's research that show the more screen time that children are having, there's more instances of them saying things like, I want to kill myself, or I want to harm myself, cut myself, things like that. There's research that talks about those type of things, and it's usually because of just the content they're consuming, and that sensory processing. Like, our brains are not meant, especially like young children's brains that aren't fully developed, they're not necessarily meant to consume as much as a screen gives us. Like, even adults, like, our brains are not meant to consume as much as the screens that we're constantly looking at.
You know what's interesting too, as I'm just taking in what you're sharing as well, is like, I find it fascinating that this is clearly an issue. It's clearly increasing. Internet especially is a massive indicator as to like what's causing these problems. But just because we're two clinicians using those words, if let's say this was a monetized channel and YouTube came across this, they'd take it off right away. When two clinicians seasoned in the field are talking about the realities, yet these kids can watch all the TikTok is wild. It is wild. The stuff that people are allowed to post on there. YouTube is too. I mean, the stuff that isn't against terms of service, but we can't use the real words that we have to use in the room with these individuals when we're the ones who are facing it week to week. Isn't that, I just find it fast. The world sometimes on the internet is so upside down. People are really lost out there with some of this stuff. It's one of the biggest drivers as to why I wanted to start doing this, is like, let's in our little corner just talk about what we need to talk about, whether people listen on a big scale or not. Let's just talk. But it's fascinating, isn't it? Right? They're like, oh, but we can have this unregulated AI that has been coded to be this teenager's girlfriend, right? And break up with him, right? And play like this internet thing, playing with a child's emotions. And where, I always think with the grace in mind, but like, where are the parents? And that's, I think, a good thing to highlight there is like, we have to, as the adults, do better for these younger generations, because we're the ones who were first on the forefront with the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in a really great session yesterday. There's a school psychologist. His name is Dr. Lane Pethick, and he works for Region 10. And he started out as like a pre-K kindergarten teacher, and then now he's this school psychologist who goes around. He works with a lot of students who have autism and behavior, and he does brain research. And he talks a lot about just that social connection and how we're missing it, and how technology has really influenced that. And they were doing this research before COVID. He was driving that point home yesterday. Like, COVID just sped it up for us, But they were doing research back in 2015 about how technology is really influencing young people in a more negative way than not. And it's really depleting social connections. And, that's whether we're talking about, higher rates of suicide, or we're talking about in our young ones, like our 2-3-year-olds and their language deficits and their social deficits, because their connection is right here and instead of right here. Like, it's not the face-to-face talking. They're watching these videos and consuming so much content all the time. And so they're not making those social connections. So they're having more social deficits as they're getting older.
It's those like video voiceovers where it's that robotic lady's voice. It's like, if I watch another one of those, I'm going to start talking.
Right, yeah. Or if I see another Coco Melon video, like, I'm going to throw the iPad across the room. Yeah. And he talked a lot too about it's what we tend to, like, as adults, when we're like providing reinforcement to children. Like, a lot of the times we're like, oh, they're walking down the hallway with the iPad, and like that's their reward for actually walking successfully down the hallway, instead of like looking them in their face and telling them like you're doing a good job, or talking to them, or appropriately modeling those social connections and those appropriate social skills that they need.
Yeah. it's interesting, right? Because I think there's a base of the conversation around validation, right? For a young child that comes in there, the validation around being impulsive and free as a kid, where like if it's not the internet and these shows that I want, then it's a bust, man. And I see it a lot, right? Obviously, I'm privy to observing as a clinician when I'm out in the world. But I think there's a lot of people that are fighting that good fight to get the tablets away from their kids. But what would you say to the parents who are struggling with that battle where it is easier to just give your kid a tablet and let them chill out? What would you say to them as a school psychologist?
I would always recommend there's always different tools, different toys, like different actual manipulatives, different things that a kid can play with aside from an iPad, aside from the TV. And if you've been using those things for a long period of time, it is going to be hard to take it away from them, because they're going to throw fits. They're going to scream, they're going to yell, they're going to cry because they're so used to that. And if you all of a sudden like take that away, like you're rocking their world, man. Like that's what they're used to. So you kind of have to deal with those battles. That's going to happen. There's going to be a period of time where they're going to cry, they're going to scream, and they're going to try to do whatever it takes to get it back. Yeah. But if you start replacing those things with actual talking, reading a book, reading a physical book, sitting down, that's like we always recommend to parents of young kids the importance of sitting down and reading a physical book with your child. And letting them point at the pictures, letting them like make the story and set the stage before you're even reading the words, because that's social skills. Right. That's talking back and forth. So those type of things, reading books, different tools that will help their fine motor skills, putty, different types of scissors, just different things that they can manipulate that will deter them from like wanting to constantly have their iPad in front of them or a laptop or a TV. And eventually you get to a point where it's like they're enjoying those things more because they're children.
Right.
Like they want to do those things. They want to play with different manipulatives. They want to go outside and play on a jungle gym. They want to look at books. Mm-hmm. Like we're seeing that less and less of like, they'd rather be playing their video game or on tablet. But like when that's their option, kids do enjoy books. Mm-hmm. They do want to read or look at pictures and things like that.
Kids are easy to please, more and more these days. It reminds me of a Christmas Story. It's like, maybe we should let that kid go shoot his eye out.
Yeah.
So we should get back to some of that. But I had a client who was doing some interventions with his middle son who was kicking him and calling him names and getting in fights at school. And we talked it through for quite some time. But when he finally started setting the boundaries, the behavior change at home and then at school was about a week of tantrum, right? Mm-hmm. Of like increase in behavior, but pretty marked across the board. All the behavior started to change. And and I shared with that client, I said, and you should probably try to be as close to as consistent day in, day out for like 60 days to really, get him to buy in. Mm-hmm. But that's what occurred for them. And it's not every house that's going to be like that. But I'll tell you, like when you were saying you put up with the tantrums aren't going to last forever. You can withstand the tantrum longer than they can throw it. Mm-hmm. Always, even if they need to throw it all day, they won't last all day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sometimes like I believe like kids sometimes need that energy out anyway. Like if they're throwing a tantrum and it's like red face, crying, like there's some energy that needed to get out of there, and then we can work on regulation. Yeah. So let them get out that tantrum, and then like let's take a deep breath or take a step back, or if you need some alone time, like help them communicate that. Like, do you need some alone time? Can you tell me that you need some alone time? Like model it for them. Or, I'm feeling very overwhelmed as the parent. Like I'm feeling overwhelmed after that. I'm going to go stand over here because I need a little bit of time. Like that type of modeling is so important. And like when a tantrum occurs, like your response as a parent after that is very important too. Because modeling and co-regulating That's where the real learning happens. That's where the real like emotional intelligence happens. Because if a kid is seeing their parent do those things, like say like, oh, like, you know, that took a lot out of me too. Like I need a moment. Do you want to take some deep breaths with me? Like, let's count to 3. Let's do it together. That's very powerful. Yeah. And that really helps with behavior change. But it's wanting to put in that work to kind of move past those things and make those changes too.
Yeah, it's a challenge, you know, and it's interesting working with adults in that, right? Because I've done the working with kids, and for the bulk of my career, I work with adults, but you can see it too, what you were highlighting. Kids do it quicker, but adults need to throw their tantrums too. In a clinical setting, that may take with an adult 6 months or 6 years, but when they finally throw those tantrums and then settle, now we can talk about regulation. And it's just as true for the adult as it is for the child, because most of the stuff for the adult that we're regulating is stuff that didn't get regulated then.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And getting people to see that, where it's not like woo woo, you know, it's like, no, this is how emotions work, and we will hold on to this stuff until it's resolved. Some people maybe are different in their resiliencies. They'll handle it differently, maybe handle certain things better, but it's still observable, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you've ever read, there's this book called, I forget who the author is, but it's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, yeah.
And it talks a lot about those kind of things, like when at a young age, if you're not taught to regulate, or the trauma that you had faced when you were younger, and how hard it is, like as you're getting older, what your body goes through and what your emotions go through and what your behavior goes through, your decision making, all of those things, how not being taught as a child, or the things that were modeled for you that were more negative, how that affects you throughout your development, and especially as an adult with your decision making, your emotional regulation, the things that trigger you, and things like that. It's a good book, highly recommend. I wish I remembered the author. I can't remember.
Well, I wish I could back you up on it, because I've read the book as well many years ago, and I don't remember the name of the author either. I know the little dancing stick figure on the front.
Yes, yeah, the blue book, yeah. I have friends in their PhD programs that are reading it right now, so they're probably like, it's this.
Yeah, yeah. Hello, yeah. They're watching right now. yeah. It's you know, that was a big thing too. Realizing that in my early work as a clinician, having to face those things for myself. And I know I'm in good company, because you and I have talked a lot about this. We don't have to go into all the details, but just being able to, as a man, also recognize my emotional pains and hurts and the ways in which certain needs weren't met. And then getting to a place, obviously, where you embrace the adult's imperfections, right? You only get one set of parents. You only get certain siblings, right? And coming to a place of peace in order to work with people in these settings. And you were touching on something earlier too, with teachers, right? They're not doing the behind the scenes work that we have to do in our like clinical programs and things we're recommended. We have to do certain therapy hours and things in order to work with people. And I think that would be helpful for teachers too, to be honest. I doubt the programs ever invite that in, but it was pivotal for me as a clinician to have to face my own pain, or else I wasn't gonna help anybody if I didn't.
Yeah, I think that's like a really great point. And we talk about all the time in education, and especially in special education, there are a lot of things when a teacher is in school that aren't in their education classes in college. So like it's mostly their pedagogy and the things that they need to learn, and they're learning how to do their TEKS. That's what you're required to do in Texas public schools. You have certain TEKS that you have to teach, and there's things that you have to get done, and you have to get prepared for the STAR test. But there's not a lot of talk about how you're taking care of yourself, or even behavior management and classroom management and things like that. So there are a lot of things where they're like learning on their own.
What are TEKS?
So TEKS are specific things that, like for each grade, basically different bullet points of topics that teachers have to cover.
Oh, okay.
I'm probably explaining, like, a teacher would be able to way better explain that
well,
than
they
I
can come on the show.
Yeah, exactly. There are things that have to be covered within a school year for each grade level, and usually it's in preparation for the STAR test that we all absolutely
Where did the STAR test
love.
come from? I mean, it is just, I watch people lose their mind over this thing.
Yeah.
Parents for their kids
Yes.
lose their mind over this thing.
We see a lot of anxiety
I'm
around.
like, look, as long as the kid's not drooling on himself, he's going to be okay in life.
And,
you know?
and one day a year, one test a year, and I tell my students this all the time, because when we're getting around STAR testing, like the students that I'm counseling, there's always a conversation about it and how like anxious they are. Like some of them that are dealing with like some real anxiety, like they're like, man, I don't know if I can do this. I'm just really anxious about this. And I'm always like, it's one day, one test, and that does not define who you are as a person. It doesn't define who you are as a student, but there is a lot of pent-up anxiety around it for everybody in education. Even me, as somebody who doesn't even have to administer the test, like I'm always thinking about my students that are like, oh my gosh, they're taking their math STAR test.
Well, what's the significance of it? Because it's not an SAT, so it's not going to have a ton of impact on whether they're getting into college, right?
No, it's data for the state.
That's what I was thinking.
You know how, like, and it's, you know, get real here on kind of how I feel about those things.
That's what I was
it's not
getting at,
reliable data for the state, because like I said, it's one day of the year, it's one test. They're taking so many tests and they're learning so many different things throughout the year, and there are so many different grades like this one. And there's been in the past, like some of these questions on the STAR test, like people who have even like created these STAR tests can't even answer some of their questions that they do on the STAR test. So to me, it's a very unreliable source of data to make decisions like for education in general, because it's just one day.
Well, that and if it was reliable, we wouldn't have decreasing reading scores and all these kind of things. Because it's like you were saying earlier, you know what is a reliable source of information is when a kid looks at me and calls me a bitch. Something must be wrong.
Yeah.
I think we can track that, you know?
Yeah.
How about we put more efforts there? But we know in our system it's imperfect. It is what it is. We make the most of it. You make the most of it. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to tear it down. Right.
Yeah.
But I do find it funny. And as a clinician on the outside, I think I have the right to find it funny.
Yeah.
That oftentimes the school system shoots itself in the foot and doesn't focus more on the behaviors that are happening in their schools these days. Because I think if they took a united front and decided to make some concerted efforts there, a lot of scores academically would improve too.
Yeah. I think so too. I think especially at these younger ages, you know, when they're in pre-K, when they're 4, the requirement should not be sitting in your desk for more than 15 minutes. Like, they should be able to get up, they should be able to play, they should be outside, they should be doing these things that are more beneficial for their social and behavioral development, rather than like, oh, they need to be able to like read and write a sentence by kindergarten. I wasn't able to, like, looking back, I was not able to write a sentence by kindergarten. I could barely read by kindergarten. And a lot of the times the expectation is like that they can at least read something, be able to read a sentence, be able to, you know, write a sentence. And it, like, in the whole scheme of things, it's not really developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
But it is kind of the expectation right now. And I think that's part of the decline too.
Yeah. The expectations. I mean, look, I probably didn't learn how to form a complete sentence for a paper until I was in junior college.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
I was telling Madeline the other day how I had written a paper when I was like a sophomore in high school, and Dad called me the comminator because I kept putting commas everywhere.
It's hard.
Just,
yeah. And like the expectation for a first grader to be able to like just spit out and write some like 3 to 4 sentences or write a paragraph, just, it's not going to happen most of the time. And that leads us down the road of like, oh, they can't do this, there must be a problem.
Right.
No, they're 6.
Yeah.
Like they're not developmentally really there yet and not ready for that yet. Let it come when it comes. And when we're getting a little bit down the road, they have some intervention, we're reteaching it, then maybe if it's still going on and we're still seeing regression, or they're staying in the same place and they're just not getting it, then let's have the conversation. Then let's see what we need to move to next.
Yeah. Do you find I know you have some of your buddies from your district listening, but do you feel like you have that support from your district when you see in the sense of regression from the students and getting not better but going in the opposite direction, the support that you need to go in and make some of these changes? Is your district doing the things that you feel are necessary?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I work with some really wonderful practitioners, and I'm not just saying that because they might be listening to
Bless
that.
Their hearts.
No,
they set her up for this.
Yeah, and I've worked with people in the past too who have that same vision too. I've worked with some amazing school psychologists, and I currently work with amazing school psychologists and multidisciplinary teams. That's what we kind of call it in the school when we're figuring out what to do with the student. I have amazing special education directors. I have amazing diagnosticians, occupational therapists, speech therapists, special education teachers that I work with, that we all have the same goal. We all want to make sure that students are getting what they need, and we want to make sure that we're implementing the right things and really looking at what's developmentally appropriate. What interventions can we do first before we're moving forward and saying that there is a real developmental problem here. I think that I'm extremely happy with where I'm at, and I work with and I have in the past to work with really great practitioners that have that same goal too.
She was telling me something different before, but pay no mind. There was one thing I want to make sure that we address, because we had talked about it a couple weeks ago, and you mentioned it again, I think, earlier today when we were chatting about it, but I think it's probably one of the more important topics that gets talked a lot about on social media, that makes it important for the show, not most important for school psychologists or for what our listeners should know. But who are school psychologists, and how does the internet get it wrong? Right? Because they do. I mean, I agree with you just across the board when people get on and start saying, well, this is the way that the school psychologist did this, and it's just some parent talking, and it's just like, I know that's not what's happening. But what would you say to that, just to clarify, what is the school psychologist? Why are they so important? What are they doing, and how's the internet getting it wrong? I know that's a lot in one, but I'm sure you have a thought on that.
Yeah, because, like I said earlier, we're very multifaceted individuals, right? And it's going to look very different wherever you're at, whether you're in a different place in Texas, like whether you're in the Metroplex, or where I'm at in West Texas, and where, all of our jobs look super different. So a parent on the internet might be saying something and they just might not fully understand what the comprehensiveness of all of our services look like. But I would say in the general sense, we're professionals in the school who are advocating and promoting academic success, behavioral success, social success for all students. And we collaborate with teachers, we collaborate with families, administrators, everybody who is involved with a student. We do assessment for special education and the disability requirements that I was talking about earlier, and those eligibility criterias. We do behavioral intervention, and we do counseling with students. Depending on where you're at, I have the wonderful opportunity to work with general education kids more often in the district that I'm at, and that might not look the same for another school psychologist in the state. They will most likely be working with special education or kids who receive special education services more often. So that would be my main thing to say about school psychologists. When people get more specific on the internet, and when I see comments just about any practitioner in the school in general, whether it be a school psych or I was talking about occupational therapist, speech therapist, a lot of the times it gets misconstrued because they don't have the training in what we do. And sometimes people do just go through bad experiences with school staff, and they take to the internet and they want to say things that aren't accurate and things like that, and out of anger, and it might be valid anger, because sometimes it happens when we have conflict within teams, and certain just difficult situations.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, because I'm never going to run for the school board or anything, Karen, get off of TikTok. Let the school psychs do their jobs. But I think there's some truth in it, the nuanced nature that you were highlighting. There's so much that goes into treating people. And I just obviously you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years, but it's nice to just sit down and hear again from you and to share with our audience the nuanced nature of how school psychologists are working with these kids, how you're supporting teachers, how those teachers are supporting you guys. I think it's a beautiful thing. And me, it's like I've never been one to like brush off the school system or to just be like everything's great, right? I'm very middle of the road of like some things need to change and some things are really good. But it's nice just to have a sibling who's in it and is passionate about it, and also to be able to bring you on and share it with our dedicated listenership here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. I always say too, and I hear a lot of other people who do what I do, who are school psychologists, like this, it's not a field you pick. It's a field that picks you. Like a lot of us, I wasn't a second grader, like knowing like what school psychologists do. I didn't know they existed until I was a junior in college. And then I had a wonderful professor who introduced it to me and introduced me to people in the community, and I got to see things in the school. So it's definitely one of those things where it's like it finds you and you become that practitioner, and it's your passion. And it definitely is. I love school psychology. I love our field. I love my people in school psychology because they all have the same goal as me. But
yeah. Well, you've never wavered. I've watched your career grow, and it's been fun to watch.
Thank you.
I have one last question for you that I ask everybody when they're new on the show. If we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride there, what would the ride be and what would you call it?
That's a really fun question. I like that a lot. I've never thought about anything like that before. I think it's not really like a ride, but the first thing that like comes to mind is like, at Disneyland when you're walking in and it's the people greeting you and like they might be taking your photo or they might be like directing you to something. I feel like I would like want to be one of those people that would be like, so here's this, and I'm directing you over to this ride that's like giving you some suggestions on interventions for your child, or here are these things, go this way to get some help if you need mental health help for yourself. I feel like that's something like that I would incorporate into a mental health theme park.
What would be your position? What would be the name of that position if it was in our amusement park?
Oh gosh, that's a good question too.
First thing that comes to mind.
The fun zone. Or the nitty gritty zone, like we're getting into it.
All right. Cool.
Those are good questions. I like that.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Rachel Daugherty, LSSP.
Yeah, school psychologist.
Yes. Yeah. We break the cycle here every Friday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Next week, we are live twice. We have our in-person recording, our networking event where we are speaking on trauma with a panel you saw 2 weeks ago. And then we'll be back here next Friday night at 7 p.m. We break the cycle together. We'll see you next week.